Good morning and welcome to the Business Standard Morning Show. I'm Nazia Iqbal and here's a look at the stories for the day. Facing flack from various quarters, the Haryana government amended its draft bill which sought to reserve 75% of private jobs for its residents. It brought down the salary ceiling to 30,000 rupees from the proposed 50,000 rupees and slashed the residency requirement from 15 years to 5. The move allayed some concerns of private sector giants in Gurugram as most of their employees earn way beyond 30,000 rupees. But what about the smaller industries whose workers get less than 30,000 rupees and are from neighboring states like Uttar Pradesh and Bihar? Let us find out.
The Haryana State Employment of Local Candidates Act 2020 has now been notified. The state government says that it will come into effect from January 15 next year. The law covers jobs where the monthly salary is less than Rs 30,000 and applies to private companies, societies, trusts and partnership firms in the state with 10 or more employees. At a time when attracting investments should be the highest priority for the government, the new legislation threatens to hurt the industry's freedom. This report explains what consequences the law may have. Haryana has a thriving tech, finance and automobile industries where lakhs of migrant workers are employed. According to the 2018-19 Periodic Labour Force Survey, just 4.4%, that is 15.6 million of the estimated workforce of 356 million in India, had monthly incomes above Rs 30,000. The survey also says that only 10.7% of the salaried jobs in Haryana pay more than Rs 30,000 a month. Companies prefer to hire workers according to their capabilities rather than their place of domicile. Although Haryana lowered the domicile stipulation from 15 years to 5 years for the new law, proving this will still be a hassle since it requires a residence certificate based on a voter ID, Aadhaar or a ration card. The law also seems to be against the spirit of the Constitution of India, which guarantees the right to equality and the freedom to reside in any part of the country and practice any occupation. In Haryana, India's largest car maker Maruti Suzuki has manufacturing facilities in Gurugram and Manesar and an R&D center in Rohtak. This is what Maruti chairman R.C. Bhargava told Business Standard. Quote, "Such restrictive policies are not at all welcome. However, due to our negotiations, the salary ceiling has come down. Almost all of our employees earn more than Rs 30,000. So, we are happy that negotiations have shown some results. But a myriad of auto component firms supply material to companies like Maruti Suzuki, and these companies will bear the brunt of the law. Industries feel it will not benefit the state and hit MSMEs that are just coming out of the crippling effects of the pandemic." We spoke with Sanjay Kapoor, the chairman of auto component major Sona Comstar and president of Automotive Component Manufacturers Association of India. He voiced his discontent.
This bill is restrictive in nature, and anything that is restrictive in nature can make us uncompetitive. We've discussed this with the government in the past. Of course, the objective of creating employment and employability is a good one. And I'm certain that industry and government can work together to reach the end objective and the goal of creating employment. However, creating employment through restrictive measures, can become very difficult for people to make more investments in the state, specifically when it comes to technical jobs. Because it makes you uncompetitive, and this could also set a wrong precedent in other states, which could then have more of an impact in terms of restrictions and other challenges that we may face as industry. We're in a position to create a manufacturing hub, specifically when we look at it from the automotive industry for the world. Putting any restrictions in terms of hiring, etc., can become a challenge for us going forward. So I would request the government to relook at this, specifically when it comes to technical jobs, and let's try and find a solution to the problem or the goal of creating enough employment and employability within the state.
Companies in the micro, small and medium enterprises sector are planning to challenge the law in court. Meanwhile, the IT industry is evaluating relocation options in nearby Delhi and Noida for fresh growth since the policy applies only to new jobs. According to IT industry body NASSCOM, Haryana is home to about 500 companies in the IT and ITES sector. Haryana is not the first state to take the populist decision. In September this year, the Jharkhand Assembly passed a bill to provide 75% reservation for locals in the private sector with a salary up to Rs 40,000. It has not been notified yet. And in 2019, Andhra Pradesh reserved 75% of jobs in private industries and factories for locals. Although the law was notified more than 2 years ago, the state has gone slow in enforcing it. Finding sufficient local talent has been difficult for industries in the state. Haryana's new law hampers ease of doing business, reduces competitiveness, and may discourage firms from expanding their businesses. The private sector now fears that more states could take a page out of Haryana's playbook.
How does Ather Energy CEO Tarun Mehta see the EV two-wheeler space evolving in the coming months? And how is his company scaling up capacity to benefit from it? How did Ather Energy achieve $100 million annual run rate in less than a year to become possibly India's biggest EV two-wheeler maker by revenue? How close is the company to breaking even? In this exclusive interview, Mehta discusses all these and more with Business Standard's Surajit Das Gupta.
How do you see the EV space, especially the two-wheeler space in which you've been working for now around about 4 to 5 years with an R&D team, and you've been one of the first who has been in this space. So how are you taking it forward?
For us, the target, right from when we started building the scooter, the 450, it was always the Honda Activa. The Honda Activa has been an incredibly successful scooter over the last 2 decades. And if you're building electric, you've got to build something that can sway an Activa buyer, right? So that's been pretty much what our goalpost has been. The original 450 that we launched was built with that in mind. Build something that's better than a Honda Activa and kind of solves the need states of a customer completely there. And we've kept progressing on that. Today, we are at a place where, given the overall supportive policy and improving battery prices, a typical high-performance electric scooter is, in most states, almost comparable in price with that of a petrol scooter. And this trend will only accelerate over the coming years. For almost all of us, volumes are building up, economics of scales are kicking in. With all this put together, I think over the next 3 to 5 years, we are going to see growth rates of between 14 to 15% on a month-on-month basis for the EV category. It's very likely that majority of scooters will be electric in the next maybe 4 years itself.
How are you tweaking your plans? How are you expanding?
So we used to produce something like 200 vehicles a month for the first 2-3 years of production as we were stabilizing things. But since then, since November last year, we've grown at a little bit more than 20% month on month. It's been pretty crazy with the supply chain. Every other month, you're going to a supplier and telling them, okay, now we need you to increase production by about 40-50%. So now we're going back to our suppliers and we're telling them to roughly quadruple their capacities for the next 10 months at a minimum. We are already commencing work on expanding with a new production line. The current line will likely be completely overflown in the next 6 months itself. So our second plant will go under construction very shortly. Also investing massively in our supply chain, ramping up capacities across the board. And the final thing is distribution. We used to have 2 experience centers till November last year. Now we have about 23. And coming year, we will end up with somewhere between 120 to 150 stores across the country.
So how many cities what's your plan? In how many cities are you going to be in?
So we are roughly in about 22, 23, I think 24 cities. We will hit about 100 plus cities by next Diwali and something like about 140, maybe about 140-ish outlets by the same time period. There is, however, still a long way to go to actually reach out to all customers. We're still only going to have about 140 outlets when some of the existing players have anywhere between 3,000 to 5,000 outlets. So there is a lot of work to do still over the next few years. But I believe this will allow us to scale up to almost something like 25,000-30,000 units on a monthly basis.
This kind of ramping up, you will require more investment. While all kinds of startups have got some fancy valuations, the valuation of two-wheelers and basically which are asset-rich companies, they have not really gone up. So how are you addressing these?
The beauty about product businesses like ours is that while it takes a lot of effort to sort of set the business up, once it is set up, revenue starts scaling at a pretty massive pace. So the actual revenue growth is not comparable. Like even SaaS businesses, edtech businesses can't match the kind of revenue growth that you can bring in a product hardware business like ours. So to give you a sense, we had a revenue run rate of about $8 million last November, right? Annual run rate. This last month, we grew from that 7-8 million number to about 100 million. So we've already crossed the 100 million run rate in less than a year. I believe we are the first hardware company in India, hardware startup in India, to cross the 100 million run rate. In fact, I'm still awaiting just some clarifications on this, but looks like now Ather is the largest EV two-wheeler company in India by revenue, right? So we have the highest value share already. Valuations will catch up pretty quickly with the actual numbers. We don't have to rely on complicated future Excel projections any longer. Numbers are very real.
So when do you think with this kind of pace, you should be able to break even?
We're actually pretty close. I think in the next year to two, we should be able to comfortably get into positive EBITDA. Obviously, this still does not account for possibly faster expansions that we might trigger with new product lines and possibly international markets. So that's got to be factored in. But as far as this business line is concerned, this is actually fairly close to breaking even in the next year or two.
So when you're saying 100 billion run rate, the actual revenues, what are you expecting?
Last month, we did about 64 crores of retail revenue. And this continues to grow. Apart from small supply aberrations here and there, I expect this number to cross 100 crores in the next 3 to 4 months. And then still continue growing for a very long time.
Coming to obviously Ola, they have in many ways looked at major disruption, looking at a capacity of 10 million, which is virtually half of the two-wheeler market's existing sale. How do you see that competition for you?
The entry of new players helps the market massively. Since Ola launched, our sales have shot up by about 60% in the last 2-3 months. Since they made their original announcements, the pace of new bookings has roughly doubled up, right? And we particularly see this in tier 2, tier 3 towns. So what's kind of happened is every time somebody announces something in the EV space, they contribute in their own way towards getting more people aware that, hey, electric is real and electric is exciting and you should consider an electric vehicle, right? And I really like a position where all these announcements ultimately get people to the internet to search for electric vehicles. And we actually have one that they can buy, right? And I actually have one that's been selling for the last 3 years and has hit pretty high quality bars. So it does help us. So at this point, honestly, I love competition. Every time somebody makes an announcement, numbers have gone up. When Bajaj launched Chetak, they've done well over the last 2 years. But when they launched Chetak, our numbers in Pune overnight went up. Because everybody in Pune suddenly discovered, oh, it looks like electric vehicles are real. Let me see what electric vehicles are. And we had an electric vehicle get ready to launch in the city that year, right? So competition tremendously helps. It also helps with the supply chain aspects because you certainly have more suppliers who find the business of building EV components more and more viable. Because it's not just an Ather now, Ather and somebody else. So the overall business viability for them improves substantially. So you see prices coming down, you see more opportunities, you see timelines coming down. So whether it's supply, whether it's demand, new competition is helping massively.
Okay, thanks, Tarun, for taking off your time. It's wonderful talking to you. Thank you very much.
Always nice talking to you, Surjit.
The RBI has launched a retail direct scheme called RBI RD, allowing retail investors to directly invest in government securities. While this is being seen as a process towards making gilt investment hassle-free, analysts are a little cautious on the road ahead as equity investment remains the flavor on the street.
On November 12th, Prime Minister Narendra Modi launched the Reserve Bank of India Retail Direct Scheme to provide retail investors an opportunity to invest in government securities (GSECs) in a hassle-free manner. Under the scheme, retail investors can buy GSEC directly and free of cost. This is in contrast to the existing mechanism where investors could buy government securities through gilt mutual funds. Another alternative was to buy it through GSEC dealers who would place it in RBI's primary market auction held every Friday. But if you want to buy existing GSECs listed in the secondary market, you can buy them from BSE and the NSE. However, low level of awareness, procedural issues, and low liquidity in the secondary market were some of the reasons why investors stayed away from investing in GSECs. So will this new scheme spur small investors' interest in bonds? We spoke to independent market analyst Ambarish Baliga to know more.
The RBI Retail Direct Scheme has been a long-term need of retail investors who wanted to invest in government securities directly. However, don't really expect a big rush immediately as the interest rates are low and equity markets are booming. Thus, there has been a much higher allocation to equities by retail investors. However, in the long run, this will provide an alternate investment option for retail investors who are looking for highest capital safety as well as steady returns.
For Nitin Chandbag, Senior Executive Group VP at Motilal Oswal Private Wealth Management, RBI RD will open the door for retail investors to participate in GSECs. The GSEC market is dominated by institutional investors like banks, insurance companies, mutual funds, etc. with lot sizes of Rs 5 crore and higher. Hence, this segment was largely inaccessible to retail participants. The RBI Retail Direct Scheme will enable retail investors to participate in GSECs across various tenors with flexible investment horizons and with the ability to get regular cash flows through risk-free coupons. Lot size of Rs 5 crore and a minimum lock-in period of 3 years through the growth option to qualify for long-term capital gains at 20% with indexation benefit made debt funds slightly unattractive for small investors. But with the new scheme in place, investors will have the option to participate in GSECs across various tenors with flexible investment options and with the ability to get regular cash flows through risk-free coupons. So, should you invest in GSECs right now? Let's go to Joydeep Sen, an independent debt market analyst, to know more.
If you buy a bond today of say 5 years, so whatever, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, if you buy a bond today and hold till maturity, you are not impacted by the mark-to-market volatility. Secondly, if you wait for 6 months or 1 year or whatever, interest rate may move up and you may get a better level to enter. So just like this, whatever money you have today, you may allocate today. If you have incremental money after 6 months, 1 year or whatever, 1.5 years, and if yields move up, you can invest at those levels also. So in mutual funds, it is not as easy to do a hold to maturity, whereas in direct bonds, it's easier to do a hold to maturity.
That said, Sen believes the success of RBI Retail Direct Scheme will depend on how liquid these bonds are at the time of selling and if the buyers are able to sell them at a profitable price. Meanwhile, this week, equity investors will shift focus on primary markets amid a slew of new issues and listings. Tarson's products will open its 3-day initial public offering today and conclude it on November 17. It has a fixed price band of Rs 635 to 662 per share for its 1024 crore rupee IPO. Meanwhile, the Rs 800 crore initial share sale of Go Fashion will open for public subscription on November 17th and close on November 22nd. On the listing front, Policybazaar, Sigachi Industries, Paytm and SJS Enterprises will debut on the bourses this week. Last Friday, the BSE Sensex and the Nifty 50 settled with weekly gains of 1% each at 60,687 and 18,103 respectively. As per tech charts, the Nifty index is likely to trade within a range of 17,800 to 18,500 this week. The Sensex, on the other hand, is expected to trade within a range of 60,050 and 61,350.
India's UPI system has pushed digital payments in a big way, and we keep hearing every month about record transactions both in value and volume terms on this medium. But that system of payments requires a smartphone. Taking this a notch higher, Prime Minister Narendra Modi in August 2021 launched e-rupee vouchers to transfer the benefits of government welfare programs. A person and purpose-specific contactless digital payment system, these vouchers do not require beneficiaries to own a smartphone. But how does e-rupee work? How would somebody using a simple feature phone use it for receiving funds and making payments? Here's an explainer for you.
With the JAM trinity of Jan Dhan bank accounts linked with Aadhaar and mobile numbers, the government has really changed how India delivers welfare benefits to the poor. The digitization of India's welfare drive was done to ensure that there was no corruption and leakages in schemes important in ensuring that no Indian goes to sleep hungry. And now, with e-rupee, India is trying to better its direct benefit transfers for those still without bank accounts. Blending the government's focus on fintech and pawnshop for techno-solutionism, e-rupee will be like the gift vouchers you get after making payments through platforms like Google Pay. These vouchers will be redeemable at specific stores with certain terms and conditions. To put it simply, these will be prepaid gift vouchers that will be delivered to the mobile phones of the beneficiaries of welfare schemes in an SMS string or a QR code. These vouchers will be redeemable at specific accepting centers like ration shops or shops selling LPG cylinders. E-rupee is a person-specific and purpose-specific payment system. E-rupee vouchers will not require beneficiaries to have an internet connection or to download a mobile app. Vouchers will open on the most elementary feature phones. A holder of an e-rupee voucher could be entitled to say 5 kg ration upon presenting the voucher at a ration shop. These vouchers will not require the beneficiary to have a bank account. In a statement, the Prime Minister's office said e-rupee was expected to be a revolutionary initiative in the direction of ensuring a leak-proof delivery of welfare services. Being prepaid in nature, it would assure timely payment to the service provider without the involvement of any intermediary. The statement added, e-rupee has been built by the National Payments Corporation of India on the UPI platform. NPCI has onboarded banks as issuing entities. So what will be the use cases of e-rupee? E-rupee can be used for providing drugs and nutritional support under mother and child welfare schemes, TB eradication programs, drugs and diagnostics under schemes like Ayushman Bharat Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, fertilizer subsidies, etc. Even the private sector can use e-rupee for its employee welfare initiatives or corporate social responsibility obligations. Any corporate or government agency will have to approach the partner banks, which include both private and public sector banks, to issue e-rupee vouchers to an identified set of beneficiaries. The beneficiaries will be identified using their mobile numbers. At the time of making payments through these vouchers, there might be a one-time password delivered to the beneficiary for two-factor authentication. The merchant will only require an application to scan and accept the e-rupee voucher and OTP. E-rupee vouchers can be used for a single transaction and are non-transferable. There might be a maximum payment limit of Rs 10,000 for one voucher. E-rupee came about amid the government's alleged failure to adequately help the poor with its welfare schemes, especially in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic. There were instances of beneficiaries facing problems linking their Aadhaar to their ration card. In its national election study during the 2019 Lok Sabha elections, Lokniti CSDS had asked electors whether they had ever been denied food grains due to non-possession or production of an Aadhaar ID, or because their Aadhaar biometric details didn't match, or on account of technical or server issues. 28% or over 1 in 4 households said they had indeed experienced such a situation. And then there's the separate matter of many poor people still not possessing bank accounts and hence not being able to receive direct benefit transfers from the government. E-rupee could solve all that, and it's programmable. That means it can be used only for a specific purpose as determined by the issuer. This way, the government can ensure there is no misuse or leakage.
That's all we have for you today. We will be back tomorrow with more news and analysis in our next episode. Stay tuned. Thank you for watching.
If you like this video, share it and subscribe to Business Standard. For more news, views and insights, log on to www.business-standard.com. Do also follow us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Telegram and LinkedIn.